Guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with How to Beat Anime. Today, well, hope you're ready for some time-warming adventures, because we got How to Beat the Future Past Killer in Erased. So, Erased, I've never actually seen it. I don't know, just never really got around to do it. But anyway, for what I remember, this dude gets about ability to time travel to past and present events. And he's trying to stop a killer from killing, people he loves. I think it was his mom, it was best friend at first, then mom, then, well, so on and so forth. I'm just going to let the video explain itself and see if we can catch where we can hop on early. Or at least start the plot. So be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Here we go.
If you had the power to go back in time and stop the deaths of your loved ones, what would you do? A killer is trying to brutally murder everyone you know across space and time, and no one can stop him except you. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the future past killer in Erased. This guy has no idea that everyone he loves is going to die. Satoru here is your below average achiever with an insane power. He goes to his second job as a pizza delivery boy when all of a sudden his powers activate. Suddenly sensing something is wrong inside of this truck, he follows it, calling out to the driver, but he doesn't respond. He then sees a kid crossing the street about to be murdered, and he forces the truck to make a turn, crashing into this car, and he saves another life. Satoru has the power to go back minutes into the past and is able to predict the near future because of this, but it's going to cost him big. After saving the kid and a trip to the hospital to treat his injuries, Satoru finally reaches home and runs into his mother. He finds out that she's come to stay with him while he gets better. Great, nice to have you here, Mom. Satoru reluctantly agrees and the two go shopping, but that's when Satoru's powers activate again, and he tells his mother that something terrifying is about to happen unless he stops it. His mother comments that he used to act like this when he was a child, but she never knew why. The two stay alert just as the mother notices a strange man with glasses holding a child's hand as they head to his car. Suspicious, this glasses guy gets into his car, but then leaves the child alone as he drives off without her, having a gut feeling. Satoru's mother quickly tries to take a picture of the guy's license plate and later mentions to Satoru that she's certain they've just prevented a kidnapping. She reveals to him that what just happened just now is like what happened way back when Satoru was just a kid, 18 years ago, when 3 kidnappings and murders happened in this very town, and the true murderer was never caught, at least according to what she thinks. Later back at home, she warns Satoru to be careful out there, as it likely won't be long before this kidnapper strikes again, and she has no idea just how right she is. The next day, Satoru's mother...
Well, to be fair, I learned that I was able to, see into the past, and I learned that we don't know how long he has his power for, or its exact limits. He seems to be only going for, minutes, which, immediate future makes sense, but I'm guessing that wasn't always the case, right? And, well, like she said, looks like this kidnapper is about to do some unfinished business. Shall we?
Begins to realize that she's just seen the face of the kidnapper before, but she can't remember from where. She does some research and begins to suspect that the kidnapper from yesterday likely committed the murders that happened in the town she lived in 18 years ago. Piecing the clues together, she finally thinks she knows who the murderer really is, just as she hears her son arriving home. Prepared to tell him the good news, she turns around to greet him, but that's when she gets murdered and silenced for good. Moments later, Satoru finally reaches home and passes by a strange man on his way into his apartment. Seeing his door unlocked, he discovers his mother's corpse right in front of him, as his neighbor accidentally sees everything and calls the police, forcing Satoru to run. Scared and afraid, his powers activate. Waking up, he realizes that he's been sent back 18 years in the past, the same year that the 3 murders in his town took place, 1988. Okay, while this may seem crazy, this could have been explained by the same thing that basically created Wolverine. It's clear before this that Satoru had the ability to travel minutes back into the past. We know. It also allows him to see a few minutes into the future, which is really cool. However, what makes this situation just now even more horrifying is that he's never traveled this far back in time. This is brand new, but it likely has something to do with a thing known as latent genetics. If DNA is essentially a bunch of molecules that contain instructions on how to make up a species, like you and me, then a latent gene is a gene that is already present within someone's DNA structure, but has not yet been activated or is doing anything. It's just sitting there, chilling. If this gene can be awakened by various genetic mechanisms, and or through other means, it could be possible that when Satoru here just saw saw his
Satoru's
mother
case,
die, and
stress.
remembered the 3 deaths that happened when he was a kid. Both of these traumatic events happening around the same time likely triggered Satoru's latent ability to travel back in time further than he's ever traveled before, just like how Wolverine first discovered his power after he saw his parents get killed right in front of him. It's important to know, though, it also can mean that his powers are going to be more powerful than he thinks. That is why we need to understand our powers better, because it will give us the safety net we need in case we mess up, and we need to possibly reload to an earlier save point, if you know what I mean. Now a 10-year-old schoolboy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I don't know what I would do if I was like, okay, say I was Satoru and I travel back to, say, early 2000s. You know, because something happened, right? I don't know what I would do. Like, if I learned there was like an event and I was like, hey, hold up, this could work. But I try to use my future knowledge to know, like, okay, what paths were like works out for the best to make sure they stay on that course so that, you know, people are still safe. Remember, there is that butterfly effect, you know, change something in the past, you know, branches off, right? So the big question is, what do you change to make things better without ruining too much of the future? Because if you do that, who knows what the future is going to hold, right? Anyway.
Satoru is horrified at what just happened. He's never gone back so far in time before, and so he runs out of school to check on his mother. Realizing she's still alive, he celebrates, but becomes determined to stop the kidnapper in the past from killing his mom in the future. He'll need to find and stop this killer before he murders 3 children within the next few months. The next day, Satoru goes to school and notices one of the soon-to-be murdered victims, this little girl named Kayo. He spots a bruise on her leg, and that's when he remembers that before she died, she was going through something really, really bad. He talks to his childhood friends about Kayo and her situation, but his friends have no idea that he just traveled from the future. And this one guy tells him to read the school paper that Kayo recently wrote an essay for, and he discovers that her essay is a cry for help to get away from her abusive mother. Satoru's memory on the past starts coming back as he realizes that Kayo's mom was the reason that Kayo always stayed late after school. And this is probably the reason she's going to be murdered very soon, because she always stays at school late. No one's around. She's all alone. With the facts in place, Satoru prepares his plan to save the first soon-to-be victim. Okay, while it may seem he has everything figured out, Satoru needs to consider 3 very important theories to do with time travel if you want to change Kayo's soon-to-be death, or you're gonna die trying. Satoru being able to go back in time at all eliminates one popular theory on why time travel is impossible. It is known as the grandfather paradox. It states that if you went back in time to murder your grandparents, this act alone would change enough of your past that would make you unable to travel to the past in the first place, since you wouldn't exist.
So basically,
however, a second theory that goes around this grandfather paradox states that even if you tried to go back in time to stop something from happening, the end outcome would ultimately still happen, just in another way. Trying to prevent your friend from dying in a car crash, he might just die later on the train, for example. And because Satoru has time traveled, it could mean that even if he saves Kayo the first time, he might have to stick to her just like Velcro all the freaking time. Now, the third and final theory that could support Satoru's mission is one known as the many worlds theory. It suggests that there's an infinite number of universes out there, with everything that could happen has happened. But these universes never interact with each other. Let's say, for example, art writer Dom has a bunch of really nice watches in one universe. But according to this theory, there's also a world where Dom doesn't have a watch collection. So sad. Or even other universes where watches own a lot of Doms and use him as a watch. Scary. Basically, the third theory means that each time Satoru goes back in time to change the past, he's essentially creating a new timeline and traveling back in time to a new timeline that he altered and not his original. And it's this one that is the only one that makes his time traveling powers possible to begin with. Now, if I was him, in order to approach this situation, he's got to figure out the why behind it all. Kayo's bruises indicates that she has a hard family life. Kayo is a recluse, barely 10 years old, and this means that the only people who have access to her intimately is her mother and her mother's boyfriend in the school. These are the only ones that would be able to know Kayo's schedule on an intimate level. I would first talk to one of the school counselors, since Japan during the 1980s began to introduce them into schools, and would notify them of Kayo's parents neglecting her. This would likely do the trick enough to cause attention to shift onto Kayo in order to hold her off from getting killed anytime soon, while we work on figuring out who the killer is, since by stopping the killer now, we'll also stop our mom's death in the future, if any of the time travel theories happen to pan out. Satoru follows Kayo.
That is true. Though, there's the question of how do we get the counselors to actually think, or at least take a look at Kayo? Because, remember, she's a recluse, so I don't think she even gone to the school counselors, right? And, well, we don't know who the killer is. But if we're Satoru and I was able to pay attention, you know, glasses, red eyes, right? So it begs the question, who would know about him? And, well, remember, she got killed because potentially she saw him. I mean, we don't know this for sure, but considering that she's dead and, well, you know, it's got to be she knows him. So, shut him up, right? So I probably asked Mom, like, hey, do you know anyone with red eyes or something? Mm-hmm. Huh. But then again, I'm not sure. I mean, you gotta get some help for, like, this job. I don't even know who I would trust with, you know, the secret of my time traveling. That's the big question. Anyway, let's see what Satoru does with Kaio.
One day after school to her favorite park, the park where she will soon be murdered. He then awkwardly asks if the two can become friends, and Kaio ends up liking Satoru's super weird directness, and he then invites her to his upcoming birthday party since it's, well, coming up. Knowing her murder will take place right before her birthday, Satoru the next day asks Kaio when her birthday is so he can get ready for it, but she refuses to tell him. Now he's annoyed, so he heads into the teacher's office to look at her file. Just as his class teacher, Mr. Yoshiro, catches him snooping around, Satoru tells him that he wants to know Kaio's birthday, and Mr. Yoshiro smiles, telling him that Kaio's birthday is the same day as his, meaning that her murder will take place before their birthday. It means that Satoru, oh shit, has only 11 days to save her before getting killed. He then rushes to go find Kaio, but runs into his older friend, and one who will get accused of the soon-to-be murders, Yuki. They go to hang out at his house as Satoru becomes even more convinced that this guy is not the true killer, and gets even more determined to save him as well. Great, because we love to add more problems to our list of things to do. After that, he heads over to Kaio's house to check on her, but he discovers something terrifying. Kaio badly beaten up in a nearby shed, and he's shocked to the bone just as Kaio's mother arrives, and she shoves him out of the way and drags Kaio back into the house. And Satoru thinks her mother could be the killer. We now have 9 days left until her death, and Satoru speeds up his investigation and discovers from his teacher Yashiro that the school knows about Kaio's abuse and that they can't do anything about it unless she's caught in the act. Thinking of a new plan, he manages to convince Kaio's mother to hang out with him at a museum during the weekend, but there he remembers that he actually bumped into Kaio at this same museum on this day 18 years ago, purely by chance, and he realizes that while he's changing the small details, he's still repeating the overall events of the past. Now we're on to the next day with less than 24 hours until her death. Satoru decides to pick her up from school, but this time watches her the entire day, even walking her home after school, and they pass by the very same park that Kaio was going to be murdered tonight, changing the course of history, or so he thinks. Dropping her home, he waits the whole night outside of her house until the next day in order to make sure she's safe until morning. And what did you know, the sun rises and he happily thinks he saved her, and the two hang out the whole day at school, at his birthday party after, making it the best day of his life, and she waves him goodbye after and he heads home, and then he sleeps off the fun without a care in the world, and he wakes up early the day after and he heads to school at all, but notices Kaio isn't there and no one knows where she is, realizing that he only pushed Kaio's abduction by 1 day and has changed nothing of the past at all. What did I tell you, my people? We just proved our second time travel theory, that whatever was meant to happen will happen. That Kaio was always meant to die, or it could just mean that Satoru here was just an idiot. Ignoring the time travel in general, Satoru here was way too naive to think that saving Kaio one time would mean that she would be safe forever. As I said before, the killer that murdered our mother was methodical and knew where she was and when she was most vulnerable, and was able to kill her without much effort. Facing the same killer from the present as we are in the past means that we should have assumed that this killer would have been on Kaio since the beginning, since he's a pro. He's done this before. It means that by making sure Kaio avoided the park where she was originally going to be killed would have only delayed things. This killer would not give up that easily. And because, like our mother, Kaio's death was not random. The victims were chosen based on their daily routines that the killer analyzed in advance. It's not surprising that the victim with a rocky family situation was chosen to be killed. The killer was super aware of his victims and knew everything about them. He should have considered altering or changing the circumstances leading up to the kid's death instead. Coming up from ideas from this angle of thinking would have been much better long term. Running out of school, he rushes to Kaio's house but sees no one home or in the shed, and then he notices adult-sized footprints leading out of it. Remembering that it snowed 2 days ago, this makes Satoru figure out that someone has been here since then. Over the next few days, the media works on sheltering the town's children from the horrifying reality of what is really going on. Satoru's classmates get told by the school that Kaio moved to her grandmother's house in another city. The police continue to investigate everyone, but that's when another kid goes missing, and Satoru quickly realizes that despite minor changes, the past is still repeating itself, and he needs to figure out what to do. passing by Kaio's house again. This time he sees her mother throwing out Kaio's clothes and almost looking relieved, happy. This freaks him the hell out, and he activates his time traveling powers all over again. He wakes up back in the present day, moments after his mother's murder. He needs to act fast. He quickly thinks of where to go and contacts one of his best friends and goes to hide out at his house. But he then realizes that his face is now in the news and his friend set him up. Trying to escape again, he climbs over this wall but runs into his pizza co-worker Airi. She tells him that she's been tracking his phone's GPS and she advises him to shut it down. Rescuing him, she takes him back to her house and she reveals that she thinks he's innocent, and she tells him that she read up on all the kidnappings that happened to him when he was a kid and thinks it's suspicious. But Satoru realizes in these old news reports that the exact location of the second 2 kidnappings after Kaio's kidnapping has now changed, making him think there is still a chance that he can go back and save Kaio. The next day, Satoru stays at her house while she heads back to work and acts like everything is normal. However, her boss tells her that he spotted Satoru entering the house the day before randomly, but assures her that he hasn't told the authorities because he thinks Satoru is innocent too, and she thanks him for not ratting him out and heads back home, and she has no idea that the killer is onto her. Getting back, she tells Satoru what just happened. Not wanting to risk it, he decides to leave Airi's house, and he tells her that he'll meet up with her later. Airi then decides to bring Satoru some fresh clothes from her house. She gets a strange text from him telling her to stay where she is, and that's when smoke starts entering the room as the entire house violently explodes. Meanwhile, Satoru tries to reach Airi as well, but realizes that she hasn't responded to his text for a while. Realizing something could be wrong, he rushes on over to check her house, and that's when he sees her place up in flames, forcing him to rush inside and save her. Barely conscious, she slips her phone inside of his pocket before she passes out, right as their pizza boss shows up helping him escape before the police arrive. Later, Satoru finds Airi's phone in his pocket and discovers the horrifying text messages that she received from someone pretending to be him. He realizes that this is the killer's doing, and he's likely been following them this entire time. He then heads on over to meet with his mother's old journalist colleague and the only friend he knows, this guy, who thinks Satoru is actually innocent. The journalist reveals to him that before she died, his mother called him and said that she figured out the identity of the person behind those child murders 18 years ago. She was supposed to meet with him to talk about it, but never made it. The journalist tells him that he suspects the murder of the 1988 murders and the death of his mother was done by the same person, who he thinks is still in the city as they speak. The journalist tells Satoru that he knows how the real killer is operating. By creating additional suspects for his crimes and delaying the investigation as a whole, it causes eyewitness accounts to diminish over time and the crime scene as a whole to deteriorate. And because of this, any trail for this killer will soon go cold. And this is how he's gotten away with it all these years. He then inspects Airi's phone that Satoru found, and he tells him that the killer probably tried to kill her just now too, and frame him for it. Satoru suspects that this is another more sinister reason, because Satoru was already the prime suspect of his mother's murder, and the real killer had nothing to gain from trying to murder Airi. He tells journalist guy everything that happened the day after his mother stopped that kidnapping attempt. Within less than a day, his mother died, and the killer knew that he wouldn't be home, which means the killer must have gotten his work schedule from his pizza job, and have somehow gained access to head into the back of the restaurant to find it. And this is likely when he met Airi, who would have been working at that time. She must have seen his face at this point as a result, but didn't say anything because she knew him, or he had access to the restaurant from beforehand. Ooh, this is a big deal. All of these factors that we already make to this plot twist is so freaking obvious. The killer trying to murder Airi here confirms what Satoru and us think we know. The serial killer knows we know about him. The journalist told us that the killer's crimes has spanned decades, and it's clear he's a pro and know what he's doing, and we are just some pizza delivery guy with a really handy power. But what makes this killer more terrifying is that he was spotted in the parking lot about to commit another kid murder, despite the fact that Japan doesn't have a statute of limitations for crimes that are punishable by the death penalty. This means that any crime bad enough, like murder, will forever be active. Even if you were caught 40 years later, you will still go to prison and die. This killer could have been chilling after his last crime back in 1988 and never got caught. So here's what we know. The killer knows who Airi is, where she lived, and he also knew where our mother was staying, and him striking Airi in this case as well makes it pretty clear that he knows our addresses. Statistically, serial killers generally kill within a single comfort area, a place where they're intimately familiar with all the details. And so from these signs, I'm deducing that this serial killer not only lives in the city, but also works here, and is intimately connected with our inner circle of friends and or acquaintances, or has business with the pizza restaurant that we work at. If Satoru broke the facts down like this, then I guarantee that figuring out the identity of this guy would have been way easier. Satoru then gets a phone call.
Yeah, that actually does make a lot of sense. Honestly, I think I would have been thinking, remember, all the deaths so far seem to be connected back to Satoru over here. Now, I'm not saying he's still doing it as an alter personality, which really, really dumb. But I mean, we did see the killer walk past him, so that's out. So I'd probably be thinking, okay, who would both my mom and Yanni and our co-worker know, but also would have access to Oasis Pizzas to know the schedule and the workplaces and the numbers to pretend to be us. So it would definitely be someone that knew it was inner circles. So I think back, okay, who goes that far back? That's a big question. Honestly, I think I'll be thinking back to my teachers at least. Because remember, when you're a kid, the only adults you should probably know are the teachers and your parents. And, well, we could probably knock off Kaio's mom, which, I mean, I'm not sure, but I still think that. Anyway, move along.
From an unknown number and discovers it's Irie, that she just escaped the hospital to avoid getting interrogated by the police, and tells him to meet her under a bridge where Satoru is currently living, and heads out to meet her. Reaching the bridge, she tells him what he thinks she knows, and reveals that earlier she bumped into a stranger before she left work, and overheard that his name was Nishizono, and from the badge he was wearing, she thinks this killer is a city councilor, and Satoru thinks his name is likely fake, and that's when the cops show up to arrest him, and Irie realizes that she was being followed. The police quickly arrest him. On the way to the police car, he notices from the corner of his eye the same man he passed by at his house right before his mother was murdered, and now knows the real killer is watching him in real time. Anxiety starts flooding his system, knowing this is his last shot. Through sheer force of will, he activates his powers to take him back in time to the year of the child murders for the third time. But this time he's now landed back into the museum, and he experiences deja vu and realizes that he's back at the same timeline as the first time, but now has only one day until Kaio's murder. This is his last shot to save Kaio and everyone else. The next day at school, one of Satoru's friends named Kenya tells him that he's noticed a strong change in him over the last few weeks, and he reveals he knows that he's been trying to protect Kaio from her being family because he's seen her bruises, and this has inspired him to become a stronger person as well. Seeing the oh-so-convenient anime timing of it all, he then decides that he needs an ally, Gia think, to protect Kaio, and he lets Kenya in on what's really going on and how Kaio will soon be murdered, and these two join forces to protect her. Satoru tries to establish a timeline of what's going to happen. He must not leave Kaio in the park tomorrow, which is March 1st. But in the last time loop, she was also murdered the day after their birthday, and that's when his friend Yuki will be framed for her murder. This means that Yuki first one needs an alibi, so what does he do? He heads off to meet him for their regular hangout session, and he figures out that he regularly passes by Kaio on the street but doesn't really know her, and this makes Satoru think that the killer must have seen them together one day by chance, and this is why Yuki was targeted. The next day, he follows through with his old plan as before. He follows Kaio around the whole day to prevent her from getting kidnapped in the park March 2nd, and make sure that she shows up to their double-planned birthday party, woo, which is the day after, March 3rd. However, midway through the party, he sneaks out to go to Yuki's house to give him an alibi, smashing a rock into their house, and this forces unsuspecting Yuki to call and deal with the cops while Satoru's birthday party is going on, officially giving him an alibi. Win-win. So he heads back to his party, and Satoru coincidentally spots Kaio's mother crossing this bridge, and boy, he thinks real long and hard about pushing her off of the stairs, murdering her himself. But that's when Kenya shows up to stop him, and he tells Satoru that he's been following him and tells him that he's not a murderer and they should try to save Kaio the right way, agreeing they decide to work together to stop Kaio's mother from hurting her. Coming up with a plan to save Kaio tonight, they head back to Satoru's party, which after the party ends, Satoru and Kenya escort Kaio back to her house, but tell her that him and Kenya have come up with a plan to save her from her mother. Without telling her about the killer, she becomes desperate and she agrees to go along with the plan that they have, and he leads her to this abandoned bus by their school, and he tells her she should hide here for the next few days while he comes to visit her when he's free. He then later returns to visit her and brings her some food to keep her fed and alive until after March 3rd, preventing Kaio's second murder. Later that morning, Satoru and Kenya act normal and head to school, noting that Kaio's mom also hasn't called the police yet. Interesting. And Satoru then revisualizes what happened in the last time loop, remembering that Kaio got back on March 2nd at 9 p.m. and after got beat up and locked in the family shed by her mother. He realizes that Kaio has lived throughout this day and the actions of her parents have now changed. This means that everything that happens now will be completely new. That night, Satoru tells some of his close friends where Kaio is and what's going on, and they go to hang out with her in the bus, and he assures them that he will take the full blame of everything. Don't worry, he's a good guy. He'll take the fall. But all of his friends tell him that hey, they don't care since they're having fun in a bus. So he tells them that he will drop by Kaio's house tomorrow morning, forcing Kaio's mother to finally call the cops on her disappearance. However, that night, someone enters the bus, and Kaio wakes up but realizes that she's behind this curtain, which means she hasn't been discovered, and she hold your breath, just as the mysterious person makes noise on the other side and then leaves. The next day, Satoru wakes up early and sneaks out to check on Kayo before school. He gives her some breakfast and reassures her that this will be all over in a day or two. Heading to class, Satoru's teacher, Mr. Yoshiro, asks him about Kayo, since he's seen them hanging out, and tells him that he's informed the child welfare office about her disappearance. Since he hasn't heard anything from her mother, so him and them go to Kayo's house later to see what's going on. He offers for Satoru to tag along, and this makes him super happy that his teacher in this timeline is actively trying to help him out. After school, they reach Kayo's house, but no one answers. With no other options, Mr. Yoshiro enters Kayo's house forcefully, seeing it empty, but he notices the heater is still on and reveals that Kayo's mother was just here. The welfare officer asks the teacher if they should call the police, but he tells them to hold off because he has an idea of where she might be. Satoru, overhearing this outside, rushes back to the bus to update Kayo and the others what's going on. Kayo then hands him a late birthday present, a first for any timeline. Aw, so sweet. She also tells him about the man that came last night and asks him to stay the night with her in case the man comes back, telling him that she heard him kick some boxes last night and seemed angry. Satoru then looks for the destroyed box around the bus and spots one in the corner, opening it and sees what's inside. Holy shit. Tools for kidnapping children. The others take time to figure it out, and everyone realizes that they're right in the middle of the kidnapper's territory, and Satoru remembers that tonight is the night of Kayo's murder. Satoru then realizes that he needs to change his plan right now in order to save her, and tells Kayo to stay with his family tonight instead. Heading back, Satoru's mother lets her stay for the night and informs the teacher that Kayo is with her, and they come up with a plan to save her. The next night, Kayo heads back home, but this time accompanied by Satoru. Kayo's mother freaks her boobs off and accuses them of stealing Kayo. She grabs a shovel and she tries to slice Satoru's mother's head off. Almost hits her, and then she tries to get Kayo, but that's when a child welfare officer shows up and catches her in the act. They accuse Kayo's mother of not calling anyone for her missing child, and they bring out their special weapon, Kayo's grandmother. Granny begs Kayo's mother to forgive her for not being there when she was young and says she will take care of Kayo for the time being, and she breaks down in tears, and everyone makes up blah 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 blah. It's all whatever. Move on. Anyways, Mr. Teacher Man congratulates Satoru on a job well done, and then he has a real father-son moment with him. It's really cool. And the teacher takes Kayo and her grandmother in the car to start a new life. With Kayo saved, Satoru now focuses his attention on saving the other two soon-to-be murder victims, Hiromi and Aya, who both go to the school next door, and he has to make sure that they're not left alone. And he notes that Aya often hangs out with Yuki, and unfortunately, she's going to be harder to keep tabs on. The next day after class, he goes to the school next door to check on the second murder victim, Aya, and takes note of her routine and daily schedule, but runs into his mother, who forces him to help her with groceries, and they coincidentally meet Mr. Teacher Man again, good old Yoshiro, who offers them a ride home, and Satoru's spying plans for the day get ruined, and he loses one more precious day to save his friends. Gee, I love this guy.
Yeah, definitely gonna keep my eye on that teacher man. Like, seriously. Shows up both times, and, well, again, like I said, the teachers and the parents of the students they teach, they're kind of well known to each other, so I definitely would keep an eye out on the teacher, because, let's be real, that ain't good. Anyway.
As mom, but I hate this mom right now. This is stupid. Look, our plan would not have been ruined if we just did one simple thing. It's got to do with friendship. Let me explain. Satoru here sucks at telling people, because in reality, there's a way easier way of doing this. People tend to return to the spots that they visited before, which means if you think about it, even if we don't know Aya that well, she's a part of our age group, social class, and background, meaning her life is not going to be that different than ours. It means that she's probably headed home for dinner during this time, which means following her would not be that hard. Of course, what he didn't take into account was that his mom would ruin his plans, and this highlights his critical mistake. Kenya knew about Kayo, which means telling him about this wouldn't have been that hard either, especially if we told him the full story, that as telling him the whole picture would have made our claims seem more reliable. By tag teaming on this job, it means that we could keep an eye on her. It would have been way easier, because in reality, the killer wouldn't have just kidnapped her in a crowded place. He would have lured her away into an alley or a dark area first. In the car, Satoru accidentally finds a bunch of candy hidden in a glove box, and Mr. Teach Yoshiro quickly confesses that the candy helps him since he recently quit smoking, and Satoru doesn't really care. It's candy. The next day, Satoru sees Hiromi and offers to walk him home, but Kenya notices him being weird again, just like he was with Kayo, and confronts him about it. He forces him to reveal the truth, that he thinks the kidnapper isn't done and will try to kill more people, and the stud ends up believing him anyways and agrees to help him save the two. They head back to check on the boss that Kayo stated, but discover that it's now been cleared out by someone. Adult-sized footprints are leading out of the bus, and they're wrapped in cloth, and they realize that the killer did this to avoid leaving distinct marks. Satoru warns Kenya that the killer is exclusively targeting children. The next day, they go to find Aya, and Satoru's friend Kazu convinces her to come check out their clubhouse. Kenya and Satoru realize that their friend and Aya are getting along well, making them think that Kazu unknowingly is solving their Aya problem naturally, which is great, and he starts to wonder if this means that the killer will begin to find new targets. And remembers his mother recognized the killer, which means she must already know who the killer is right now. With Aya being taken care of, they focus on protecting Hiromi next, but they find out that the class bully from earlier, Misato, has started to become more alone than usual. Since the lunch money incident, she's become cut off from the rest of the class and now hangs out alone, potentially making her the next murder victim. So Satoru kicks his new plans into high gear and begins following her around town, trying to figure out her schedule. My, just like a stalker. That's disturbing. He follows her to their class hockey stadium, and there he sees her go to the toilet, and Satoru waits for her outside, but realizes that she's taking an unusually long time to come out. And that's when Mr. Teacher Yoshiro bumps into him, and he tells Satoru that he's here to cheer for the class game, and asks Satoru what he's doing waiting outside the women's bathroom. Satoru says that he's waiting for Misato, but Mr. Yoshiro tells him that she already left. They hear a truck drive out past them, and Mr. Yoshiro tells him that he saw Misato leave in it. Satoru notices the truck belonging to Yuki's father and is confused why she would be in it. Pressed for time, he asks his confused teacher to help him follow her, and he'll tell him about it on the way. In the car, Satoru tells his teacher what him and his friends are up to, but covers it up with a little bit of a lie, and tells him that they're playing a game where they pretend there is a kidnapper on the loose that targets loner children, and they must try and stop him. Thankfully, Mr. Yoshiro believes him and tells him to fasten his seatbelt, and Satoru tries to log it in but sees it jammed, and his teacher tells him that it's been acting up lately. Mr. Yoshiro tells him that he can tell he's taking this game very seriously. This must mean why he's been acting so differently from the last few weeks. He asks him how he found Misato here, and Satoru tells him that Hiromi told him she'd be here, but he sometimes feels bad for using people in this game, and Mr. Yoshiro tells him that he shouldn't feel guilty because doing good and bad deeds are the two sides of the same coin, creeping Satoru out. He goes on about how he also has done similar things recently in order to try and get close to someone, and he mentions how much fun this has been for him. Satoru asks if he wants a candy, opening up the glove box, but then notices a box of laxatives in there instead. As they go through this tunnel, Mr. Yoshiro tells him that this isn't his car, and confesses that Satoru is playing this game as if there's a real kidnapper on the loose. How amusing, and he tells him that he can't believe he's been able to read his thoughts, and suddenly makes a sharp turn away from Yuki's family's truck, revealing to Satoru that Misato isn't here, but is still at the hockey stadium, and Satoru begins to sweat. He tells him that he has no idea that Satoru was onto him until the day he ran into him, snooping on Aya, because that was the day he was going to murder her, revealing that he planned to see if Satoru was really onto him. He was the one who told Misato to start going to watch hockey games, and told Hiromi about it. He even ordered food parcels from Yuki's family's business, all planned to set up Satoru. Reaching this iced river, Satoru tries to escape, but his, seatbelt is jammed. Mr. Yoshiro tells him that he admires how he found about him, and comments that it's almost like he can see the future, and takes out a baseball. Taking out a basketball from his bag behind, he places it on the gas pedal, forcing Satoru to go down with the car, and it sinks into the river. About to drown, Satoru accidentally yells out to Yoshiro that he knows what lies in his future, and he passes out. Satoru wakes up then, out of nowhere, somehow, in the hospital, and can't remember how he got here or what happened. The doctors tell him that he's been in a coma for 15 years, but his mother has been keeping his body active all this time, so he stayed pretty fit. He's also made the news. Later, he gets visits from his childhood friends, Kenya, Hiromi, and even Kayo, who is now married and has a son with Hiromi. What the what? Playing with the baby and touching it, he accidentally receives all of his memories about his powers, who he is, and the horrifying events that he was trying to stop. Later, he gets a visit from his old teacher, Mr. Teach Yoshiro. Satoru pretends that he doesn't recognize him, and he tells Satoru who he is, and that he is now a city councilor who got married and changed his name to his wife's family's name, taking over their family business. He tells Satoru that they've been through a lot together, and he's been waiting for him to awaken for 15 years, and he's gonna wait patiently until he gets his memory back, because, they need to talk. The days pass by, and Satoru gains his strength back, and Kenya and Hiromi visit him more and more, but Kenya tells Satoru that he's gotten all his memories back already, forcing him to confess that since so many years have passed, most of the evidence about what really happened is probably gone. There's no point in bringing anybody else into this mess. Kenya then lays on some good old bromance on him and tells him that Hiromi became a doctor because he visited Satoru so many times in the hospital when they were younger, and he also became a lawyer and is still actively trying to find Satoru's attacker. That's how much their friendship meant to them. They beg Satoru to not fight alone as he did when they were young, and convince him to let them in on the full story, revealing to them that Mr. Teacher Yoshiro is the real killer. They come up with a plan to stop him, along with his mom, who can tell that his memories have returned, and he lets her in on the truth as well. It's game time. A few days later, Satoru arranges to meet Mr. Yoshiro and asks if they can talk privately, away from reporters. He takes him to the roof, tapping his fingers on his wheelchair. Reaching it, Satoru confesses that he's regained his memories, but Mr. Yoshiro tells him he knows, because when he tapped his finger on his wheelchair seconds earlier, he noticed him flinch, like he was on alert. With both of their cards on the table. Mr. Yoshiro demands to know how he predicted all of his moves, because a regular kid would not have been able to do any of this, and asks what he meant when he said he could see his future. He tells Satoru that he knows he's also recording this conversation, and forces him to hand it over, telling him to try and stop him, it's pointless, and reveals his horrifying plans for him. Satoru tells him that he knows he won't kill him because he would have been dead already. He then lunges off the roof, forcing Mr. Yoshiro to save him from falling. Satoru then tells him that he is the only one that gives meaning to his life, and he is the only one who truly knows the real him, and this makes Mr. Yoshiro start crying as he lets Satoru fall, and announces that he can't live without him either, and he prepares to kick a bucket too. About to jump, he spots Satoru down below, still alive, surrounded by all of his teammates, and realizes that he's been set up. Well, good golly gee, this might seem great. I instead would have relied on this 2006 digital camcorder in order to stop Mr. Yoshiro. Let me explain. The plan they just pulled off was way worse than that one time. It's known from beforehand that Yoshiro here is a real cunning serial killer and doesn't leave evidence of his crimes and frames others. This guy wants to murder kids because he wants to spare them a life of hardship and pain. Basically thinks he's a god. And this means that this psycho and us putting ourselves in this vulnerable position, even if it paid off, was stupid. Their grand solution not only seemed rushed but risky and had way too many variables, and things could have gone so wrong. What they should have done, unlike Yoshiro, we had a whole team, which means that I could have been less risky and could have kept a 5-man rotation at the hospital at all times, near Satoru's hospital room, and would have also placed a few small recording cameras in there, like these digital flip video cameras hidden around his backup. Having our teammates take shift outside or near Satoru's door for half-day intervals would have allowed us to look for Yoshiro incoming 24/7, and we could have also subtly banged on the door to give off a sign to tip him off and let him know that he was in the area, preventing Yoshiro from getting us until we discovered enough to get out of here in order to properly stop him, or could have caught him in the act of trying to kill us through our cameras and phones placed around the room. Yoshiro quickly gets arrested for attempted murder, and the day is saved. Over the next few years, Satoru ends up becoming a successful manga artist, and notices that his powers haven't been activated since the day he saved everyone. Taking break from another day at work, he goes by for a walk, passing by the same bridge he once hid from the cops under, and there he spots a blue butterfly past him, and a stranger runs into him and asks if she can take shelter from the snow with him, and she takes off her beanie, and Satoru recognizes who it is.
Kaio.
Irie.
But what do you guys think about the video? Don't.
Yeah, that was Kaio, but nope, Irie. Okay, makes sense. Well, they stopped the killer, and I had a feeling it was the teacher. Because remember, the mom noticed, so definitely was someone she would notice. And, well, parents tend to notice the teacher. Oh, there you go. Let me know what you guys think. Until next time, like, subscribe for more. Adios.